Actions proposed by the Department of Justice, which are due to him August 25th. He will accept any briefing of the Department of Justice on those redactions.
All right, that was the attorney for many of the country's most prominent news organizations arguing that the public interest could not be greater in releasing the affidavit that led to the raid on Mar-a-Lago a week ago on Monday. Good morning to you at home. Welcome back into Wake Up America. It is Friday, August the 19th. Happy Friday to you. I'm Rob Finnerty, and here's a look at what we're covering for you this morning. Florida Judge Bruce Reinhart surprising many by allowing parts of that affidavit to be released by August 25th, although it will be heavily redacted. We'll be talking more about this with President Donald Trump's attorney, Christina Bobb, coming up in just a little bit. Meantime, what does this mean for the midterms? That's a question a lot of people are asking. According to a new poll, the FBI search at Mar-a-Lago has charged up GOP voters coming in November. We are 81 days away from the midterm elections, but Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says Republicans have a better chance of taking the House than the Senate.
I think there's probably a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. Senate races are just different. They're statewide. Candidate quality has a lot to do with the outcome.
All right, and marijuana now legal across much of America. It has also become a massive industry that is now targeting kids. We're going to talk with one mom who says this is becoming more and more dangerous. That is a story you don't want to miss. All right, let's go back to Florida right now for more on the raid. Again, it happened a week ago Monday. The affidavit, that was what we heard about yesterday in Florida, in a Florida courtroom. For more on what this all means moving forward, let's welcome back in former Assistant DA for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, constitutional law attorney and Newsmax contributor Amir Benno. Amir, good morning. Great to have you on early with us. So this judge, Bruce Reinhart, this, by the way, the same guy that signed the warrant, this judge ordered a redacted version of this affidavit released by noon next Thursday, August the 25th. So this is going to be one of those Sharpie affidavits once it's all said and done and gets to the public, isn't it?
It is, Rob. Good morning. Yep. So the government is going to have to submit their proposed redactions to the judge. The judge is going to decide whether or not those are enough or those aren't enough. And then he'll have the last word ultimately and determine what's going to get released. And actually, I should say next to last word, because if the government or either side objects to Reinhart's decision, they can, under the rules of criminal procedure, they can appeal that to the district court judge, who I don't believe there's been one assigned yet to this case, but this may drag out a bit.
Amir, Judge Reinhart, this surprised me yesterday. He argued that this case was unique and unprecedented. Again, this is the same guy that allowed this whole thing to happen by signing the warrant. Did that surprise you?
Well, it is unique and unprecedented. What surprised me is that he determined that the government had not met its burden of putting the entirety of the affidavit under seal, which perplexed me because he is, like you said, the same judge who decided in the first instance to place it under seal on the motion of the government. So what has changed from that first point in time when he granted the government's motion until now, other than the public outcry? And this just goes to underscore and highlight the importance of an adversarial process. When you have people on the other side pushing back, suddenly then it becomes the judges become a lot more concerned about what they're doing. But when you only have one side doing something, then the judges become a rubber stamp. And that's what's really problematic.
Right. Great point. Amir, we'll continue this conversation top of the next hour. Thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it. All right. So the big question now is if Donald Trump is, in fact, indicted, does that mean he can't run again in 2024? Most experts, legal experts, say no, it doesn't necessarily mean that. For more, let's welcome in RNC National Spokesman and Director of Black Media Affairs, Paris Denard, former Nevada State GOP Chairwoman and Newsmax contributor Amy Tarkanian, and political analyst and best-selling author Mark Halperin back with us. Okay, so good morning. Great to have you all on. Happy Friday. Mark, let's say Donald Trump's indicted, charged. Let's say that happens. This is not going to get figured out for a long time. Could you see a world where we're going to trial or something like that closer to the 2024 election? Do you think that's part of the arithmetic here?
I could, and I'd say if he's indicted on enough counts, he might get 100% of the votes in the Iowa caucuses.
That's a good point. Do you think that happens, Mark?
That he gets indicted?
Yeah.
22% chance.
22. Amy?
22.5% chance. No, I'm not exactly
Amy,
sure, but I can.
We play under Price's Right rules here, Amy.
Right.
So if you've gone over, you lose.
Paris knows about this.
Okay, well, as long as I win a car. But no, so I think still in the end, no matter what happens, this is only going to basically, it's going to energize the GOP base, and it's going to energize those who were still on the fence maybe at the end of his last term. And now it's going to pivot very strongly towards another President Trump.
Paris, did this surprise you yesterday that this same judge, again, the judge that signed the warrant, is going to allow some of this affidavit? Again, he said this is an unprecedented case. Normally, affidavits remain under seal. Did that surprise you? And what do you expect for us to actually see next Thursday?
Well, I hope that we see more than just, as you mentioned before, a sharpied up type of affidavit so that the American people can get the information that they deserve, because this is unprecedented. This did send a dangerous signal to any politician or any average American that is concerned about the overreach of government for political purposes, the weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI. So, yes, it was slightly surprising that the judge was seemingly open to having some of the government's documents revealed. But at the same time, we have to understand that judges are looking at this from the law, and it can understand that there is a public appetite for knowing what happened, because this is the sitting president of the United States.
Yeah.
And his reputation is also on the line. His judicial philosophy and jurisprudence is also on the line on this as well. So I think that could also play a factor into why he made the decision that he did.
I love the First Amendment and I love press freedom, but the public has an appetite to know lots of stuff. And I think people have lost sight of the reason why grand jury material needs to be secret, investigative material needs to be secret. So great if they can put stuff out that doesn't hurt the investigation. And I would say this about any investigation, whether it was politically tinged or not. I think the press has created a hysteria about the notion that this should be released in full, when, again, that's not the standard practice. In the public interest, I don't think trumps the governmental interest to pursue investigations. And again, I'm saying that not about the Trump matter, but any investigation.
But
I'm
Merrick Garland,
going to disagree with you, Mark, on that, because I think at this point, the more transparent, the better. And that's why I agree. If there's nothing wrong, then go ahead and unleash the entire thing. Why redact anything at all at this point? So then that way everybody can make up their minds and we can move on.
You want C-SPAN cameras inside the grand jury?
Well, I think at this point we're kind of at that point.
Paris,
I think what the American people want to know is why the FBI had a raid on former President Trump's private home, and what were the documents they were looking for. If this was such a pressing matter, if this was such a matter of national security, why did Merrick Garland wait for weeks on end trying to vacillate between whether or not he should do this? You know, the American people deserve to know. Republicans want to know, obviously, why they took the measures that they did, especially when they didn't take the same measures for Hillary Clinton, especially when they haven't taken the same measures for Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
And so I think the American people do need to see exactly what's going on. And of course, we don't want to jeopardize any type of investigation as it relates to national security. But if we're talking about birthday letters, and we're talking about a birthday menu,
passports,
and cocktail napkins, and passports
for a former American president. That's a ceremonial thing. You get to keep your passport, even though it's government property. You get to keep your passport as a former president. At least that's been the precedent for every prior president, commander-in-chief. They went in there. They didn't know they were grabbing anything and everything. And this warrant and this affidavit apparently allowed that. The big question now, and Mark, to your original point, this is fomenting a lot of anger. I think on both sides of the aisle. But look at the way that MSNBC is characterizing what we're seeing play out right now. One anchor said that we're actually already in the midst of a civil war. Listen.
You have millions of people tuning into a propaganda network every night. And then, as if that were not bad enough, that's an extremist network itself, you have these fringe pop-up outlets, you know, from OWN to Newsmax. Then you have the social media component. That train has left the station. There is no let's deal with the rhetoric. At this point, I do think we have to have serious conversations around preparing for actual violence. People keep saying a civil war is coming. I would say a civil war is here.
Now, you're not going to hear that language here. And I will say one thing, by the way. So fine, we might propagate some of the other side of the story. People say, oh, you can't have activism in journalism. Listen, with where we are right now, Mark, unfortunately, if we don't tell you what's going on the other side, you're only going to hear one side of the argument from the dominant quote unquote media. Mark, your reaction?
I'm kind of fixated on saying Newsmax is a pop-up network. Because last time I was in the studio, it seemed pretty solid there.
Yeah,
Not
we got
like
a couple million viewers a day. I don't know if we're a pop-up network.
Not like a Halloween store that opens on
that
October 1st.
That doesn't bother me. It's just that she says that we're fringe and extreme. Listen, if Newsmax, if Fox didn't exist, you would exclusively hear one side. You know what that is? That's China. That's communist China. That's Russia. That's state-run media there.
Yeah, I'm disappointed in the back and forth. I think I'd like to see people just be able to get good information so as informed citizens they could make decisions. And I think part of the problem is the dominant media had a monopoly for so many decades that they went from being just kind of fundamentally liberally biased to openly liberally biased.
And the dominant media losing some of their prized ponies. Brian Stelter is on the way out, Brian Stelter at CNN. We have a lot more to get into this morning. A Florida poll has Val Demings beating Marco Rubio in their Senate race down there. And Ron DeSantis released a campaign ad. So a lot more to get into. This is an ad you'll want to see. We'll do that top of the hour. Thank you, Paris Denard, Amy Tarkanian, Mark Halperin. See you soon. Alex, good morning. Happy Friday to you.
Good morning, Rob. Happy Friday. Yeah, a lot of stories we're following for everybody this morning. Well, first, a tragic story where 3 people were killed after 2 small planes collided in Northern California. The 2 planes were making their final descents when the incident occurred. A pet on board one of the planes was also killed in the crash. The mid-air collision is currently under investigation. And staying in California, a semi-truck collided with a train, killing the driver. Now, the truck then burst into flames on the railway tracks. Police are closing multiple roads near the crash site and asked residents to please avoid the area. And the NYPD arrested 3 suspects in connection with the murder of a taxi driver in broad daylight. 4 suspects were caught on camera attacking the 52-year-old victim who confronted the crew after they allegedly attempted to rob him. Now, currently a GoFundMe for the family of the victim. A father of 4 has raised nearly $160,000 for funeral costs and the children's education. And in Texas, fire crews worked to extinguish 12 wildfires that were burning across the state. The Pine Pond fire is the largest of the fires, burning nearly 1,000 acres. It's now 65% contained. And after a very wrong turn, police helped guide an elderly driver out of the 2nd floor of a mall. The driver went through an automatic door and started driving through the walkway before realizing the mistake. Luckily, no injuries were reported. Brian Stelter is out at CNN after his show, Reliable Sources, is canceled by the network. Now, the former CNN anchor says, quote, "It was a rare privilege to lead a weekly show focused on the press at a time when it has never been more consequential." Now, this news obviously causing reaction online. Author Stephen King saying, "The one show on CNN I never missed was Reliable Sources with Brian Stelter. It has been an invaluable window into how the media covers itself." Today, CNN canceled it. Well, former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury Monica Crowley didn't hold back, tweeting this out. "Brian Stelter and Liz Cheney getting canned the same week is like Christmas, Mardi Gras, and Independence Day all at the same time." Now, some are predicting who is next to get canned from CNN. First was Chris Cuomo. Now it's Brian Stelter. Next to go is Don Lemon. But some did come to the defense of the former CNN host. "Media accountability is incredibly important. I'm thankful that Reliable Sources will continue in some form. But tonight, cheers to you, Brian." But I think it's best we leave you with some best hits from Brian Stelter.
If you say this is a cult, What's the first step of deprogramming? Not all opinions are created equal. You think about major newsrooms like CNN that have health departments and desks and operations that work hard on verifying information on COVID-19. And then you have talk show stars like Joe Rogan, a conservative backlash to growing acceptance of gay and transgender people, a conservative fear that traditional beliefs are being trampled on. Questions like these. Is the President of the United States a racist?
All right, Rob, Brian Stelter, who's next?
So what's interesting about Brian Stelter, and he hosted Reliable Sources for 9 years, he didn't start out like this. He wrote a book called Top of the Morning. It came out early 2010s, like 2013. And it's a great book that chronicles what happened with the Today Show and Good Morning America and the Morning Wars. And it really is a good book. Something happened when he walked through the doors at CNN. And the other thing, Alex, and we talk about this all the time, likability. He's just not that likable. And that's the X factor in television. By the way, I'm not saying I'm likable. Alex, can we get you on screen, by the way? Why is it just me talking to myself here? Where are you?
People need to see my reaction to this.
It's just one of those things. Every time I see him on Sunday morning, it's the sanctimonious, and he talks at people instead of having a conversation with people. There you are.
You're very likable, Rob.
We'll see.
I'm going to argue
we'll
that.
See. They call it a Q score on a 1 to 10. I think I'm like a 4, but we're increasing rapidly. I'm kidding. All right, Alex, thank you. All right, let's talk about Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan. Caused a lot of controversy when she went over there, and then a group of lawmakers led by Democratic Senator Ed Markey wrapped up a trip over the weekend. They went just 12 days after Nancy Pelosi went and ignored all warnings not to go. What happened after she went? Well, we saw 10 days of war games by the Chinese Navy right off the Taiwanese coast. For more, let's welcome in former Navy nuclear engineer, former Pentagon official and military diplomat in Asia, Brent Sadler, back with us. Brent, good morning. Good to see you.
Thank you, and good morning.
Yeah, nice to have you on. I read your piece in the Washington Times. You basically said that China is furious that Nancy Pelosi, third most prominent politician in the United States, although likely an outgoing Speaker of the House, visited Taiwan at the end of July. And what I thought was interesting is you said that China could move on Taiwan a lot sooner than the rest of us think, because the U.S. is finally starting to build up our Navy again and our military again. Oh, no, not like we did during the Trump years, but we're certainly doing that. What do you make of that?
Well, absolutely. So for quite some time, there's been a small group of analysts and folks inside and outside government trying to draw a spotlight to what's become known as the Davidson window. And it's a group or a basket of pressures like demographic, economic, and military balance all coming together to make this an exceptionally dangerous decade because of the domestic pressures and the political pressures on Xi Jinping and Beijing to act on Taiwan. And that all comes to a head the later part of this decade, beginning in 2027. That's not to say that China could do something untowards sooner, but the immediate future, the next 6 months, probably the odds are low, but not zero. But certainly the region has woken up to China in the last few years. I was in Japan in June, and it's clear that that's not the Japan of the 80s, the 90s, or just even a couple of years ago. Ukraine and Putin's war there has woken up the Japanese. They're on track to go well above their decades-long mandate of not breaking 1% of GDP on defense and probably going to 2% in the next couple of years.
By the way, is that appropriate right now? I'm sorry to interrupt. That dates all the way back to World War II. Obviously, the Japanese, Pearl Harbor, we were at war with Japan. Once we won in the Pacific Theater, we said, listen, Japan, we're going to be allies, but you're not going to have a military. That's a long time ago now. Is it time for Japan to have a military again?
Absolutely. They have a force called the Self-Defense Forces that came in actually to support the U.S. and the UN in the Korean War in the early 50s. But only after North Korea started doing nuclear tests and shooting missiles over Japan in the late 90s did they start to reinterpret their constitution, a very pacifist document. And they, in effect, have a military. They have an active military, an active regional policy, at least for over the last 10 years, driven by China. So they have a military, and they're about to double down on their defense spending, and that's got the Chinese attention. They're not just having to deal with Taiwan, the U.S., but increasingly a stronger Japan.
What do you make of China and Russia? They're going to be conducting military drills together in Russia over the next several weeks. What do you make of that relationship and that dynamic?
It's a marriage of convenience in many ways. There's a lot of distrust, historical animosities that they'll never overcome. And certainly Russia doesn't like the fact that they're playing second fiddle to the Chinese increasingly. That being said, it's eye-watering the last few years. It's starting off with one event in particular in 2019, where both countries flew nuclear-capable bombers around contested island in the Sea of Japan.
Right.
And they've repeated that ever since.
Right.
So there's a high level of coordination that's going on.
Brent, just about 10 seconds. So Saudi Arabia, biggest oil producer in the Middle East. President Xi from China is going to visit Saudi Arabia. They need a lot of oil. They use a lot of oil. What do you make of that?
No, absolutely. I think they are trying to secure oil sources. The supply is certainly not meeting demand. There's a host of reasons for that. Some of it American policies. So I think it's much like President Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia, shoring up access to oil.
Yeah, I don't expect a fist pump, though, between the Saudi Crown Prince and President Xi, like we did with President Biden a couple weeks ago. Brent Sadler, let's do it again. Thanks so much for coming on. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, you too.
All right, we've got a lot more coming.
Flights are expected to move farther south into the mainland U.S. this week. The phenomenon typically occurs closer to the North Pole, but now may be visible in regions of Pennsylvania, Iowa, and Oregon. Weather conditions permitting, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, this new visibility is produced by a strong geomagnetic storm. Now, those are just some of your headlines, but as always, for any breaking news, head to Newsmax.com and keep it right here, because another hour of Wake Up America starts right now.
He will consider redactions proposed by the Department of Justice, which are due to him August 25th. He will accept any briefing of the Department of Justice on those redactions.
All right, that was the attorney for many of the country's most prominent news organizations arguing that the public interest in the Trump raid affidavit and the release of that affidavit could not be higher right now. That affidavit, of course, led to the raid a week ago Monday at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida. Good morning. Welcome back into Wake Up America. It is a Friday morning, August the 19th. I'm Rob Finnerty. So glad you decided to join us this morning. Here's a look at what we're following for you right now. Florida Judge Bruce Reinhart surprising many yesterday by allowing parts of the affidavit to be released by, as you just heard, noon on August the 25th. That is next Thursday, although it will likely be heavily redacted. We're going to be talking more about that with President Trump's attorney, Christina Bobb, coming up in just a little bit. In the meantime, what does this mean for the midterm elections 81 days away? According to a new poll, the FBI raid at Mar-a-Lago has charged up the GOP voting base ahead of the midterm elections. But Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says that Republicans have a better chance of taking the House than the Senate.
I think there's probably a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. Senate races are just different. They're statewide. Candidate quality has a lot to do with the outcome.
We'll weigh in on that in just a moment. Plus, marijuana legal across most of the country right now. It's become a huge industry, an industry that is targeting kids now. We're going to talk to one mom who says this is becoming a very dangerous issue. But first, let's go back to Florida for more on our big story this morning. More on the raid and the affidavit and what this all means. Joining us now is former Assistant District Attorney for the Manhattan DA's office and Newsmax contributor Amir Benno. Amir, welcome back. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Good morning.
So, Amir, here we go. I think it's interesting, and this wasn't really mentioned yesterday afternoon, but that attorney that we just heard from is arguing on behalf of the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, NBC News. There is basically saying that the affidavit should be released to the media and the public. There's a media angle to this. Donald Trump is really good for ratings. If the affidavit is released, this continues to froth up this story ahead of the midterm elections. Is that unusual? What'd you make of that?
Well, no, I don't think it's unusual. I think you're correct that it's newsworthy, but there's also a First Amendment right of access to judicial proceedings. And so I'm not surprised that they're making the legal arguments. And the judge now has to decide the competing interests, the interest in access and transparency to the American people on one hand versus the government's argument that this is going to threaten the integrity of the investigation, chill witnesses from coming forward, compromise confidential sources sources and perhaps even lead to certain targets of the investigation either fleeing the jurisdiction or destroying evidence.
Yeah.
Only the judge has those facts and will have to make that decision.
But we don't typically see a media attorney, representing the country's most prominent, quote unquote, media organizations with typical DOJ investigations. And normally, affidavits do remain under seal until investigations are complete. That's typically how it goes. So when we do get this affidavit, anytime between now and noontime next Thursday, are we looking at a Sharpie affidavit, heavily redacted, lot of black ink?
Yeah, I would imagine that this is going to be heavily redacted, and those portions that are going to be released are going to be, I would guess, those sort of vanilla, non-controversial things that won't shed much light on probable cause. I mean, one of the things that's most fascinating here is the main charge listed in the search warrant against President Trump is the Espionage Act. What the government has to demonstrate for probable cause there is not just that there were some sort of national defense information taken, but that information was taken with the intent to help a foreign nation or to hurt the United States. We don't know what they have or if they have anything that can substantiate probable cause on that. And that's why this is such a newsworthy issue, because it involves a former president.
Great point. Amir, you and I have been talking about this so much over the last few days. Is there anything that grabbed your attention yesterday that you wanted to mention? Just something that caught your eye as an attorney?
Not yesterday, but one thing that I think is really important is why do it by a search warrant versus a subpoena? The answer is very, very simple.
Right.
If you subpoenaed the president has the ability to retain some documents and not give them all over to the government, and the judge has to decide whether the retention of those documents by the president is correct. If you do it by a search warrant, you can sweep everything up and then just give back those things that really didn't fall within the ambit of what the search warrant permitted. And that's what the government chose to do. They chose to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission, and that's problematic.
Right. Typically the case when it comes to the government there. Amir Benno, thanks so much for the expertise. We appreciate you waking up early with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll do it again soon. Let's welcome in our guests. We have RNC National Spokesman and Director of Black Media Affairs, Paris Denard, former Nevada State GOP Chairwoman, and Newsmax contributor Amy Tarkanian. Amy, I apologize. I just got Trump on the mind right now.